Hello, my name is Comley and I am co-CEO of MeeTwo Education, and I'm going to be talking to you about the impact of school closure on youth mental health during this lockdown period. Our app MeeTwo is a pre-moderated peer support service for anxious young people to make it easier for them to talk about difficult things. It's aimed at young people aged 11 to 25, and so we have deliberately designed it to look and feel like social media, when in actual fact it's been built using the latest research into digital peer support. And primarily because we are working with such young children, we have prioritised safeguarding and data protection. So all posts and replies are checked before they go live by human moderators who are assisted by machine learning, and that allows us to be very protective over anonymity and also offers a confidential service where we can identify those young people who are most at risk and help them to get real-world support. We're featured on the NHS Apps Library, which is another really good marker of the safety that we offer. So MeeTwo supports over 35,000 young people who might otherwise access Tier 1 and Tier 2 mental health services. So we're very much in that early intervention and prevention space. We do have a few users who are at the more extreme end, sort of Tier 3, Tier 4, right up to young people who are currently inpatients in hospital, but the majority are those who are at sort of pre-crisis point. And 40% of our users are male, something we're really very proud of since it's so hard to engage with boys. And 96% of young people say that MeeTwo helps them, and 99% of our users say that MeeTwo is a really supportive community. During lockdown, we've launched a new service called MeeTwo Connect for schools, universities and the NHS. And MeeTwo Connect allows those institutions to integrate their services with MeeTwo. And this is just really fantastic because it means that young people who are accessing safe peer support can then very quickly and easily move through into the real-world support services offered by those institutions. It also means that we can pass on the data, insights and information that we get from MeeTwo, anonymised, aggregated, into those institutions to help them improve and their services and inform their staff. The MeeTwo dataset is becoming something really quite special. We've got over 90,000 posts now and 250,000 replies, and because every post is checked by a human, we can tag it by topic and risk assess it, and that's allowing us to identify longitudinal patterns in behaviour change, both at an individual user level and also at a population level. So what do young people worry about on MeeTwo? Well, pre-lockdown, this is a pre-lockdown graph, mainly it was friends, relationships, anxiety and self-harm. It's interesting, you can see there that friends in the blue line is much more of an issue for the younger users, whereas relationships is something that the older users are more interested in and discussing, which entirely expected, I guess. And then on the 20th of March, the government announced that schools were being closed, and on that day, between 8:30 and 8 o'clock in the evening, we received 27 posts expressing suicidal intent or desire, and this compared for the whole of 2019 with just 406 suicidal posts. So we braced ourselves for the crisis that was about to come, and certainly we weren't alone. If you go back and look at the newspaper reports from that time, everybody was fearing this crisis and catastrophe in youth mental health. And certainly that is something that we have seen quite a bit of. Usage of MeeTwo has increased by 30%, so that's the amount of posts people are making, it's the severity of posts, and it's also the amount of time spent on the app. And we had to create this new topic, coronavirus, because the highest proportion of posts were discussing lockdown and the situation of that coronavirus has created. But we've also seen some positives in our data. There's been a steady decline in the number of posts about friends and also about school. Now, school is perhaps understandable. The young people aren't at school at the moment, so it's not their main focus. We've also seen a small but steady increase in positive support. We often see one around January. I think there's sort of the new year rush to be good and do better. But then since February, that positive support has been building. And in contrast to the headlines, we also saw that there was a decline in anxiety, depression and self-harm, all of those mental health indicators. I mean, it's particularly noticeable with anxiety dropping in January and February pre-lockdown, dropping right down then post-lockdown from March onwards. But before we attribute this to coronavirus, actually it's what we see always during the school holiday periods. So this is our data for 11 to 14-year-olds and 15 to 18-year-olds in the red line, and blue is 11 to 14-year-olds, from August 2018 right through up until May 2020. And you can see that the troughs in the data correspond with school holidays. So when the kids aren't at school. And now we can actually go in and look at what those posts are telling us. So behind the aggregated data, and just before school closed, we were getting a lot of posts about fears over what it would mean to no longer have the support that school provided. For many young people, they get their mental health support through some sort of provision that's put on at school, whether that be a school counsellor, a pastoral leader or a head of year. And so we had a lot of posts, and I think that's probably what triggered all those suicidal posts in March, because this fear that the support that they were getting was going to be taken away from them with schools closed. But then during lockdown, the emphasis changed and it moved on to a real decrease in motivation, and young people finding it incredibly hard to study and to stay focused. A lot of boredom, a lot of worry about losing ground on schoolwork. And when we looked in a little bit more detail, we could see that was because for many young people, studying at home is just really difficult. They don't have the facilities, they don't have the setup. They're having to sit on their beds because their room doesn't have a desk. They're having to share laptops in the evening with their siblings because their parents need the laptop in the morning for work. And this is an issue that has spanned all age groups, right down from 11-year-olds right up to those university students, and it's one that's been reported quite heavily in the media. So we're not out of sync with that. There's also been a lot of issues around lack of communication from teachers. When the young people are at school, they can find it really easy to stay behind at the end of the lesson or knock on a classroom door and get a little bit of support from a teacher at the end of the school day. It's immediate and it's very simple. Suddenly everything became much more difficult, with teachers not being able to respond to emails, perhaps because they were struggling with their own issues, to schools not having the right setup for digital communication, and there were lots of fears over safeguarding issues, which meant that video calls weren't happening, one-to-one calls weren't happening, and so all these barriers have caused young people a lot of concern. And ultimately what it means is that the students have been bottling things up. They've not wanted to go and reach out to a teacher because they perceive it as being so difficult. And if you think about it, a 15-year-old still needs to be taught how to write that formal email. They may still need to be taught how to have a phone call with an adult, and having to just do those things without any guidance or support was particularly daunting. There have also been a lot of anxiety about going back to school. We saw that particularly around June when schools briefly started to open up. Feelings about being overwhelmed as to what might happen next year, and lots of comments from young people who hadn't barely left their houses, let alone their bedrooms, during this period. So a lot of social anxiety coming to the fore. But as we showed you earlier, going back to school is always difficult. So this is the same plot, but we've moved the arrows now, and you'll see that the peaks in anxiety all correspond to the start of term. So what is it that makes school so stressful? Well, friendship issues is right there at the top. And by friendship issues, we don't just mean actually engagement between friends, but it's all of those social interactions among peers. A lot of social anxiety mixed in with that. The next big issue is change. Young people are used in the holidays to maybe getting up at 10 o'clock or 11, and then suddenly their whole regime is turned on its head and they're having to get up at 7 o'clock. They know that change is coming, it makes them fearful, it makes them anxious. There is a big piece around being judged and fear of failure, and that ties in very much with the somewhat excessive assessment that we do of young people in schools these days. And for many teachers, I think they feel confused that the high stakes tests only come at the end of the year normally, but actually for many young people every single test, no matter how small, is an opportunity to look like a failure, either in front of their peers or in front of their parents, which creates more pressure, a feeling of being overwhelmed. So what might make September easier? Well, we would encourage schools to actually start communicating before school starts. We think it's really important that students feel included and informed so that they can understand what it's going to look like to go back to school, because it isn't going to be normal. What are the procedures going to be like? What are they going to have to do? We can start having that communication long before school, actually, the first day of term. Some schools are also doing team building exercises before school starts, which I think is a brilliant idea. We need to reassure students that they will catch up. It's not going to be a disaster that they've missed a few months. They really will be able to catch up, and we need to remind them of that. And I think we need to prepare staff and support staff to understand how to manage these friendship issues. I expect that we'll see the same kind of friendship issues that are commonly seen in years 7 and 8 permeating all the way through the year groups, and that's going to be unusual for many teachers. A big suggestion, controversial maybe, but would be to consider changing the school hours. And that's not only to make it easier for young people to readjust to the new regime that they've forgotten about, having had so many months off, but it would also reduce the worry and the burden for young people having to travel during the rush hour and the commute. Why couldn't a school start at 9:30 or 10 o'clock? And it could even then be slowly adjusted back to 8 o'clock over time. And when school starts, well, again, it all comes back to these friendship issues, building those team building bonds, making sure that young people all feel that they can trust each other, trust the teachers. All of that trust has been eroded. We would really encourage schools to delay assessment or do it in a different way that doesn't add as much pressure. Do we really need to know how much students have lost during this period? Probably not during the first couple of weeks. I'm sure there are other activities that they could do. I think it's important not to make assumptions about who needs help. We've seen that lots of young people have been bottling things up, and many of those people might be young people who wouldn't normally need help, and they may be the ones who don't always ask for it. We've talked about giving students time to adjust to this new routine. They're jet lagged. They've only been waking up late. They need to get back into the habit of being at school. The most significant thing, though, and I say this partly as a school governor, is that this period has been an extraordinary time of experimentation within schools for new ways of learning. And I think schools have this opportunity, if they have the capacity and the courage, to see how students have learned. They've had more autonomy than students have been given in decades, and undoubtedly they will have discovered ways of learning that they prefer and that are more effective. So I do hope that schools will use this period to reflect and to learn and to see how maybe we can improve education in the future from this period. So I hope that you found that interesting. We would love to talk to anybody, whether you've got questions, whether you would like to work with us and do more research, or whether perhaps your school or your university would like to benefit from MeeTwo and MeeTwo Connect. We'd be delighted if you get in touch. Thank you.